Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I really appreciate everyone coming on this morning. And so I want to let you guys know I'm Mark Field. I'm the Senior Vice President of Investor Development Experience here at the Knoxville Chamber. And we really appreciate you being on with us this morning. We're really excited to have with us today some great panelists to talk about electric vehicles and innovative work that's happening in our region. And we want to let you know that if you have any questions during the presentation, please put those in the chat and we'll address those at the end. So in the interest of time, let's go ahead and get started with the reason we're all here today. I want to introduce our three panelists to you. First of all, we have Drew Frye, who's the Senior Project Manager of Electric Vehicle Evolution, Innovation, and Research at TVA. Thank you for being here, Drew. We have Rich Davies, who is the Sustainable Transportation Program Director and Efficient Energy and Renewable Energy Coordinator at ORNL. And then we have Christian Guy, the Director of Operations and Strategic Sourcing at LM Industries Group Incorporated, which a lot of you would know, Local Motors, that name. So thank you guys so much for being here with us today and to share your insights on the EV landscape and participate in this discussion with us. So let's go ahead and get started by hearing a little bit about yourselves. So Drew, why don't you start us off?
Absolutely, thank you. So as the introduction said, Drew Frye, I actually had a very recent job shift. So I'm a manager in the Energy and Services and Programs group at TVA. So managing a couple of different electric vehicle programs. And so prior to that, I had about 10 years in the Innovation and Research group, a lot of electric transportation projects where we tested out new charging stations or new cars or how we integrate solar and electric vehicles together. So familiar with the technology, been an EV driver for several years with at my work with TVA and personally with a personal vehicle. So excited to be here and answer questions about TVA and electric vehicles.
Thank you, Drew. Rich?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, Rich Davies. I've been at National Laboratories for the Department of Energy about 25 years now. I've been at Oak Ridge approaching 5 years. My background is really in lightweight vehicles and materials, but now manage a program that spans every element of our research portfolio with DOE that is electrification, advanced fuels and engines, as well as advanced lightweight materials, and a lot of work on connected and automated vehicles.
Christian?
All right, thanks, Mark. Christian Guy, the Director of Operations and Strategic Sourcing at Local Motors. Been with the company for about 2.5 years. That was in aerospace in the realm of operations and in finance. The EV/AV space that we've been a part of at Local Motors is increasingly growing, and I'm happy to say that it's growing in large part due to the work here happening in Knox County. Started with Jesse Smith and moved on. I've been working with Wilson Meyer and the rest of the team at Knox County with Mayor Jacobs. The work that's going on inside of Knox County and Knoxville itself is extremely exciting, not just for Local Motors, but for the entire EV/AV space. Really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Christian. I share those sentiments. This is a really exciting time for Knoxville and the EV movement. So thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourselves. We're lucky to have all three of you guys here today, to be honest with you. This is a great panel, and so we appreciate it. So let's get started. So what opportunities and challenges do you guys think are being presented to the Department of Energy and with the new current administration, what the evolution of EV looks like over the next 3 or 4 years? Rich, I'll let you go first.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm sure my colleagues have something to add here. So the big shift that we see right now with the new administration is basically the stated goal is transportation is going to be carbon neutral by 2050. This is a huge challenge, a huge transformation that's required given our current dependence on fossil fuels. So that decarbonization is driving things. In order to meet that challenge, there's probably a plurality of fuels and systems that are going to be developed. You'll see it's going to be very much by weight and distance that vehicles travel. As you get down to things like micro mobility up through light duty cars, very heavily battery electric solutions that are being pushed. All the way up through medium and heavy duty. And you'll see a mix there of electrification, hydrogen, as well as what's called net zero carbon fuels. These are fuels that are basically produced with electricity. And those net zero carbon fuels, things like biomass derived fuels, are going to really go into the aviation and marine type industries moving forward. That's really the stated strategy. If you really look at what they're driving most heavily through research and development is going to be the electrification strategy. And that electrification strategy is going to really put a huge pressure on the generation and distribution of electricity in the US. There's estimates that could be as much as a 50% increase in generation to essentially displace these fossil fuels inside of the light duty, medium duty, and a big section of the heavy duty vehicles as well. Really, this is rapidly shifting from what was a big push on needing better battery technology, needing better electric drives, needing to build vehicles that were efficient and cost effective. A lot of that's very well done right now. And you're seeing these companies shift over, especially in light duty, to all battery electric strategies within the next 10 or 15 years. And this is going to drive major investments in both battery plants and manufacturing throughout the US, as well as innovations around renewables, energy storage, and things along those lines. So these are the major pressures that we're seeing over the next couple of decades. And our colleagues like TVA have a major transformation to manage. Good luck, Drew. And I think it's going to be an exciting future as we make this change.
You guys got something to add?
Well, I think Rich captured it really well. I think from a strategic level, there's not much more that I can add. From a tactical level on the ground, I'm seeing how the market is responding to the statements that he's made. Principally, we're seeing new players come into the market. I can talk specifically about our battery supplier, who was working primarily in providing batteries for a forklift. They have now migrated into, true mobility and are wanting to engage with us to get into the space because they see that this is the absolute future and the future is now.
I'll piggyback on that and say, tactically, we've seen a few things, TVA being a part of the federal government. We've seen interest in understanding the vehicles that the federal government themselves operates, whether that's the Postal Service or the laboratories or anyone. And so a real focus on what can we do to electrify and reduce the emissions associated with the federal government's vehicle fleet right now. And there's just a lot of interest in what the administration will do. And we already know sort of their aspirations. And I think, as Christian just said, we've seen the market start to react to that, whether it's the announcement of battery manufacturing facilities in Tennessee to expand more electric vehicle options in the future, or the manufacturers that are going to make the cars and everything else that goes in the electric cars. So it's a really exciting time, and excited to see the next couple of years what else comes down the line for us to work with.
Good. Thanks, guys. Well, Christian, after hearing Rich talk about design and the importance of it, talk a little bit about Ollie. Where does LM Industry stand deploying it? Tell people a little bit about Ollie, what it is, and tell us where you are.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Ollie itself is an EV/AV shuttle, principally designed for first and last mile mobility solutions. I think that's the statement, and then its use cases are variable. What we're looking at now across the 28 1.0 deployments, that's our first model, and our 15 2.0 deployments to date, are use cases at hospitals, military bases, closed campuses for businesses and colleges. Interestingly, in Europe and in the state of Florida, we're seeing the deployment at specifically designed communities. These are focused on the EV/AV mobility solution. They are exclusively going to be EV/AV in the near future. Principally now they're a little bit mixed, but the design of these communities is around the EV/AV space. So you can start looking at the placement of chargers, the accessibility to loading stations and offloading stations. You have locations designed principally for pickups for hospitals that are at the deployment site in Lake Nona, or for schools, and in one case, even a tennis facility across the highway. This is causing challenges for Ollie, the good kind of challenges. We are looking at increasing our speed from our current rate of about 12 to 14 miles an hour, getting up to about 17 miles an hour and a little bit higher. That's allowing us to certainly move people faster and more efficiently, but it's allowing us to gain more share of these planned community projects because they need something with a little bit of higher speed. When we look about where we're deploying, as I mentioned, we are deploying in the Southeast US in Florida, but we also have several deployments in Europe, in Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, and France. We also have deployments in the Asia corridor, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. As I mentioned, Florida is emerging as a hotspot on new development focused on the EV/AV space, but so is Tennessee. The microfactory is located in Hardin Valley. As some of you may be aware, we did have a facility in Chandler, Arizona, that this time last year, due to COVID and other complications, we elected to shut down and focus all of our resources on Knoxville. The interest in Knoxville is also because of our origin story at NBF and with Jesse's team. Bringing everything full circle back to Knoxville has been a fantastic achievement that is highlighted by the work of Wilson and some folks over at Knox County. And that highlight is that Ollie is operating on public roads in Hardin Valley with a plated vehicle. This is a first for a US built vehicle. This is more exciting than I can possibly put into words for the company and for the space. It's starting to break down legislative barriers and open opportunities, not just for Ollie, but for those sub-suppliers that we work with. As I mentioned before, we're seeing massive entry into the market, and that's driving competition, reducing prices, which is going to make the price point of Ollie drop. And consequently, it's going to make the price point of all EV/AV drop. And that's going to make adoption a little bit easier. We're really excited to continue the work in Knoxville. We're looking for future partners to grow this space. We believe that this is a community and collaborative affair that can only be successful by bringing in like-minded individuals and companies to develop and disrupt the current system, and to do so with speed and efficiency.
Great, Christian. Thank you so much. We're lucky to have you guys here, and we want to wish you the best of luck, and anything we can do to support you, obviously, all you need to do is ask. So thank you for that. So with Amazon, Patagonia, all of a lot of these big companies kind of on this path to become carbon neutral, you know, in the coming years, 2025, one date. It's a buzzing topic right now. So Drew, tell us a little bit about what TVA is doing right now and what changes you see in the near future with more companies wanting to be carbon neutral.
Absolutely. And the TVA board meeting last week was very timely for this question. So if you didn't get to attend or listen to that, we released our 2020 sustainability report. And so if you go to tva.com/sustainability report, you can see that fairly short document. It talks about what TVA has done over the last several years and our goals and aspirations going forward. And there's also a companion report to that that's all about carbon, tva.com/carbon. And you can see sort of the progress TVA has made. But the number one thing and takeaway from this is what's going on right now. And that is 60% of the electricity that TVA generates is from carbon-free sources now. So nuclear, solar, wind, hydroelectric. So we're already at a very, very good starting point. 60% carbon-free is something a lot of utilities would love to be at right now. And that actually represents over a 60% reduction from the 2005 baselines. So 2005 is kind of the baseline year that a lot of folks like to calculate carbon reductions from. And if you read through that report, it'll show you kind of our plans in the near future and our aspirations that are a little bit longer out. So TVA plans to be at about 70% reduction from the 2005 baseline by 2030. And we have a path towards 80% reduction by 2035. So think about 80% reduction by 2035, which is not too far away. And that's using the technology that's available today. So increasing our output from our carbon-free resources, transitioning away from coal-fired plants, kind of keeping reliability with natural gas plants, and adding a whole lot of solar and energy storage in the middle. And so, you know, that's sort of what's technically possible today, the path to 80%. But our aspirations are to be net carbon zero by 2050. And so that last 20% of carbon reduction is really sort of technology still being developed today, whether that's a lot more solar and different kinds of energy storage that are in laboratories today, or whether it's something yet to be developed, a reliance on something like hydrogen or other kinds of fuels. But I encourage you to check out the sustainability report. It'll give you a lot more detail than I can. And it also talks about what's important to TVA beyond carbon and the other things that are really sustainability in our minds. Things like innovation in electrifying transportation, or the people and partnerships and economic development in our region, really keeping us sustainable for the future. But check it out, tva.com/sustainability report to learn more.
Thank you. Rich, anything to add?
Oh, I think we're very fortunate to sit in the backyard of TVA. That 60% number is something that is really the envy of most of the country. We're happy to partner with them. We think that TVA for us may represent the opportunity to do some pretty significant demonstrations at the national level in partnership with them. We do hope that this does prove to be an advantage for our region, starting out with that level of 60% and working their way up. So yeah, we're really looking forward to it. And so if you don't mind, Mark, I'll go back to something that Christian said here too as well on the EV, AV, and that last mile, first mile. I want to just emphasize how important that business is. That movement of people and goods, that first mile and last mile, is really going to be a renaissance over the next 10 to 20 years. That electrification, that autonomy, because there's going to be a lot of goods moved and a lot of people moved, and that last mile and first mile is probably one of the most exciting spaces to be in. So I'm really happy to have Christian in our backyard.
That's great. Thank you, Rich. So, Rich, recently we know that you were on the 10 Smart seminar. Tell us more about how companies can get involved with 10 Smart, what it is, and get more involved with ORNL. What are you guys, and talk a little bit about what you guys are doing to support. When you mentioned Christian there, talk about how you're supporting things like what LM Industries is doing as well.
Okay. All right, fantastic. And really, with working with the Tennessee Department of Transportation, one of the major recognitions that we see moving forward, particularly from a research and development and deployment standpoint, is it used to be that most of our research would be commercialized on vehicles. And we would work with the General Motors and companies to make mass deployments of lightweight materials, alternative engine technologies. We're still doing that, but the renaissance that's coming in connected and automated vehicles and the intelligent transportation system that can make the entire system more efficient is no longer going to be commercialized on vehicles. It's going to be commercialized by the entities who have the jurisdiction to operate the roads. Imagine the transportation management center of the future that is going to be more like an air traffic control center with connectivity to vehicles, dynamic routing, dynamic switching of stoplights, and things that make this whole system more efficient. And so we looked at what we needed to commercialize, and we knew we needed a new partner set, and we needed stakeholders to engage with. And we saw a healthy collection of companies and universities and entities around the entire state, like TVA, that we believed that we needed to focus on that commercialization in our region. And we needed our stakeholders to come together routinely to focus on things like connectivity and automation and electrification. And so that was really the genesis behind 10 Smart. We now have a collection of, everything from our colleagues at Federal Express that we work closely with, as well as TVA. And you can go to 10 Smart and see all the members. But really, that change in the way things are going to commercialize, the connectivity and the Internet of Things that's going to drive this, had us decide that this was the right time to put together this team, put together these collaborations, and really try to work together to forge Tennessee at the leading edge of this. Our partners at Tennessee Department of Transportation really are on the leading edge of this. Our partners down in Chattanooga, where we're doing a lot of collaborative research with them around their intelligent transportation system, those partnerships and that ecosystem is what we're looking for to drive the innovation in the region. And I think we can lead the country in this regard.
That's great. Anything to add, guys? All right. So
I'll pop in there, Mark.
Go ahead, Christian.
I think the comments about Tennessee and Knoxville becoming a hub and spoke of technology in this new space is a fantastic achievement for the state and for the county and for the people here. As I mentioned before, with Local Motors focusing its growth and development here in Knoxville, we're leveraging that expertise, that collaboration, and that open-mindedness. It's a fantastic and fertile ground for us to be operating in.
Well, you guys are a great example of us leveraging the assets that we uniquely possess here in this region. TVA, the lab, the university, all those things that we talk a lot about around here from a chamber perspective. But this truly is an example of you guys leveraging the assets that are around here to really change the world. So Drew, Tennessee announced their partnership with you guys for an initiative to put EV charging stations every 50 miles on our interstates and our major highways. What's that project look like for TVA, and how do you think it's going to affect the region? And Kristen, you might jump in, Rich, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does it look like for TVA? So we're planning to partner with local power companies across the state and across the region to get these charging stations installed. And like you say, we're targeting at least every 50 miles. That is something that constantly pops up when you look at funding opportunities from the federal level. Being able to claim you have charging stations every 50 miles or a plan to get charging stations every 50 miles gets you certain designations as corridors, and that opens up future funding opportunities possibly. So we see this as, you know, a multi-pronged thing. It's getting infrastructure out there so more people can, you know, drive their electric vehicle farther, sure. It's also speaking to the folks who are, you know, considering an electric vehicle or not considering an electric vehicle because they're not confident in the ability to recharge their vehicle while going on road trips or making trips, you know, between different cities. And it's a way to bring future funding to the Valley as well. So our partnership with the state of Tennessee is basically that we're going to work together, and you know, we're going to have some separate programs, but they're going to be very highly coordinated. So almost a divide and conquer approach. As funding sources become available through the state or through the federal level, then we can, you know, match it to the appropriate people and build more infrastructure. We talk to consumers all of the time, and typically they get in an electric vehicle and they love it. And then the conversation might stop with, yeah, but there's no place to charge it. You know, where are the chargers between here and Memphis? And so that is kind of a top barrier that consumers face. And so this is one way to get around that. And you know, EVs are different than our gasoline powered vehicles. Over 80% of the charging of an electric vehicle happens at home. Over 90% of the charging happens at home and at work if you have access to charging stations at home and at work. So it's a different shift in how we refuel, but we still need that public infrastructure. And so we're really excited about this opportunity. We hope to start seeing charging stations in the ground this year, but it's a multi-year approach. And we're really trying to connect all of our communities and the whole region together.
Rich?
Yeah, maybe I'll add to what Drew said there. I want to take one specific angle on this. There's a lot of great things that come from this charging network, but one of the challenges that you have with electric vehicle is being able to reach the people that live in multi-family housing, the people who live in apartments, who don't have street parking, who don't have access to charge their vehicles at home. And really, if you look at the way that they're going to need to access the grid and get the power is probably through these DC fast chargers, because they can't, they just don't have access to do it at home. So there's a really interesting aspect of the economics behind this, particularly in what maybe underserved communities, as well as people that just don't have access to garages and that power and charger. So there's an economic advantage to being able to reach into different demographics to own these vehicles as you get more and more DC fast charging deployed.
Well, Christian, this has got to be good news for you that obviously the infrastructure to be able to power vehicles like you guys are building is getting much more interest. So anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add to the foundation that Drew built and then the color that Rich added, and say that I want to take it one step further. One of the development projects that's been going on with our partners at the lab is wireless charging, where Ollie can essentially run over a wireless charging embedded in the ground and would allow it to forego having to stay at even a fast charge station. We would like to see those become deployed in the ground on roads where cars would be able to incrementally charge themselves over time. Again, I think everybody is concerned about how do you go about fueling up your vehicle? How do you have access to charging stations? Having the infrastructure there is breaking down some of those cultural barriers that people have, just apprehensive about the new technology. I like to see it pushed a little bit further, make it a little bit more user-friendly, where it becomes almost intuitive, where fueling a vehicle is part of driving the vehicle rather than a separate act itself.
Well, certainly making sure that we've got charging stations every 50 mile acts as its own awareness campaign.
Certainly does.
So that's a really good thing as well to build momentum. So folks on the call, we are kind of getting down to our final couple of questions. I want to remind you again, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We've already got 5 or 6 questions there now. But as we're winding down here, please, if you have any questions, put those in the chat, and Ginger will bring those up in just a few minutes. So there's so many great things happening in this industry in our region right now. Is there anything else that you guys think we need to highlight or add to the discussion here in regard to EV technology and the research that's going on? I'll start with you, Rich. Anything else you want to add?
Well, one of the things that it's probably maybe not obvious from the comments that we had, but one of the things that we're pushing to is a much more heavily renewable energy. And renewable energy is really carbon free, and it's got cost effective. The challenge that you have sometimes with renewable energy, and you've seen instances of this, is that if you're in the dark and it gets too cold or you lose your wind, you in fact need to have something that looks like grid scale storage. One of the big challenges that we have with large deployments of these renewables, along with microgrids that could solve this problem, is this grid scale energy storage. Now, this could look like anything from deployed systems of batteries to hydrogen generation and then essentially utilization. And there's pump storage. There's all sorts of things that are out there, part of this innovation. But really being able to take full advantage of renewables requires some energy storage at the grid scale that is unusual in the past. Maybe there's instances around Europe of the pump storage, but this is something that we believe is going to be a big part of our future.
Good. Drew?
Yeah, I think the technology as it develops is really interesting and kind of fun. Batteries and cool cars and wireless charging and charging stations every 50 miles. But I think we don't want to overlook the impact that this industry is having in our communities as far as jobs and investment go. I've lost track, but the last time I totaled it up, we're somewhere near $5 billion of promised investment in Tennessee as it relates to electric vehicles, batteries, charging stations, all of this stuff. So it's just a tremendous economic development engine in our region. And as one announcement happens, or we start to put a plan in place to have charging infrastructure, the phone just starts ringing from folks who want to manufacture charging stations or build the next electric vehicle or the next battery that goes in an electric vehicle. So there's just a tremendous amount of energy as it relates to attracting investment and attracting jobs in the Southeast and in Tennessee specifically. So I think that's super exciting and something that probably flies under the radar when we're talking about this.
Good. Christian?
That's a great point, Drew. And let me maybe piggyback on that a little bit. The interesting thing about the EV/AV space being on the cutting edge, and we're talking about renewable energy, is it starts to bring in partners that are looking at other things that are renewable. One of the things that Local Motors is doing is working with a company in Europe that will allow us to recycle the 3D printed upper and lower, which are effectively our chassis. That 3D print material that was helped designed by Jesse at the lab is allowing us to effectively be able to recycle an ollie. So we're reducing our footprint as well as going towards carbon neutrality. And again, that's bringing investment and bringing in new players into the market that are attracted to the concept of EV/AV, but they're also looking about moving towards carbon neutrality, reducing footprint, creating recyclable materials. And inside of the Local Motors brand is the word local. And that's principal to our success. We don't want to be doing business with companies that are outside of our geographic region, and certainly don't want to be doing them when I'm having to bring in product from across the shore. And so reducing the logistics train to get everything that I need from a supply chain perspective is part and parcel to our success. And it, again, it's just part of the culture that Local Motors is trying to drive. And with partners that we have here, we feel like we're going to be successful.
That's great. Well, most of you know, and if you don't, certainly our website would be a great place for you to look and see that we have selected 5 strategic platforms that we feel like innovation, research support, and the evolution of business in this community is going to be inside of these 5 strategic platforms. 2 of those, one is power and one is movement. And so you guys play a huge role in those 2 coming together in this particular instance with EV vehicles in the power sector as well as the movement sector. So it's very exciting for what's happening. We really appreciate your insight. So I'm going to turn some questions over to Ginger. Ginger, I know we have some questions. I think there are 8 questions in the chat. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but let's go ahead and talk about a couple of those questions.
Absolutely. So first one, is the current gas shortage, however short-lived, predicted to affect electric vehicle adoption rates?
I'll go at that first and say, especially when gasoline prices go up, there is a jump in EV adoption rates. I'm sure it plays into some thought process, this shortage, and sort of, I don't know how many people are making the connection of, hey, if I drove an electric vehicle, I wouldn't have to sit in this line and buy gasoline. I know my family and I definitely made that connection this week, as we didn't have to sit in line for gasoline. But I would think so, but I wouldn't think it's a top driver. You know, really, there's a lot of things that influence someone's decision to buy a car. Probably the biggest one is the vehicle availability and the choices that are out there. So, electric pickup trucks and SUVs and, more affordable cars and things like that. So we're excited about the next 4 or so years when a lot of new electric vehicles are going to come to the market, and see how people are going to respond and buy those vehicles.
Anybody else?
Well, our sales, sorry, Rich, I'll let you go.
So go ahead. You're actually making the vehicles. You probably have a better relevant answer. Go ahead, Christian.
Certainly. Do the sales cycle of an Ollie, which is typically about 12 to 18 months, given the price point of it and the adoption that we need to have from the buyers. We're not seeing a particular uptick, but I am seeing the interest rise. So we are getting, queries that are coming in through our portals that have started to increase, whether they're speculative or true buyers, but there is certainly an interest peak.
Good.
Yeah, one observation, if you look at a lot of the proposals coming out of the federal side right now, trying to go EVs at the federal fleet, the number of vehicles that would need to be purchased in order to meet some of these mandates is actually quite high. And so you might see demand pick up considerably. And at that point, we might actually be stressing the supply chain to be able to produce the number of vehicles that the federal government wants to essentially get purchased and deployed. So we're really interested to see how this plays out over the next several months and years.
Good. Ginger?
Yeah, next question. Can you speak to the evolution of the public sentiment around nuclear power?
Can I speak to it? Yes, but I don't want to. No, it's probably not in my wheelhouse to answer that. I will say, in Drew's opinion and TVA's opinion, we look at all of the generation sources that we have, and we look at the pros and the cons. And as we drive towards more carbon-free electricity, which nuclear fits that bill, there are pros and cons of the different technologies to get you there. And so TVA is very supportive of advanced nuclear technologies. We have put in several proposals to develop small modular reactors and other kinds of advanced reactor technologies. And I think the way our CEO explains it, if the United States needs TVA to lead in that space, then we will gladly lead in that space and work on these technologies for everyone. As far as the public sentiment about it, I don't know if I can speak to it. There will always be folks who understand the pros and the cons of that and value certain aspects of it and not value other aspects of it. So that's kind of, I guess, the most I will say there on that topic.
Good.
maybe I'll add a little bit as I around the country interact with people who are trying to decarbonize, and people that decades ago really were staunchly opposed to the nuclear solution really are starting to understand that the imperative on the carbon side, as they see it, is starting to outweigh in some cases their concerns on the nuclear side. The reliability and consistency of a nuclear power plant is very difficult to duplicate in a carbon-free basis. So I see sentiment changing. Certainly there's always going to be people that look at the, as Drew said, look at the pros and cons, and the cons are just too big. But there are shifts amongst people who are deeply concerned about carbon.
Okay. Ginger?
What are the panel's thoughts on proprietary versus unlocked OCPP charging hardware and networks?
Well, somebody explain that first.
A technical question. I like it. So I'll explain it. OCPP, Open Charge Point Protocol, is sort of the communication standards behind the scenes of how you talk to charging stations. So if you're not familiar with electric vehicles, there's all different makes and models of charging stations out there. It's sort of like, Pilot gas stations and Matco gas stations, and we work on standards to ensure that your car can plug into the charging station. And we work on standards to be sure that we can maintain and operate the charging stations themselves. And so OCPP is really about how networks talk to charging stations. And we're always a fan of open standards. We understand that OCPP can be leveraged to do that. And so going forward with our charging network, we're going to look at, again, sort of the pros and cons of mandating a standard like OCPP, or at least mandating equipment that can use OCPP. So you can prevent things like vendor lock-in. You can take a different network and talk to a different charging station or switch one out for the other. So I think it's very important and something that we'll be looking at with our charging infrastructure.
Yeah, and if you look at it from our perspective, we believe that the charging of vehicles will likely be a lot more planful than perhaps we are now with just rolling in and filling up with the liquid fuel. If you don't have a handshake between the grid and say a heavy duty truck that can go in and charge at 2 megawatts, you generally are going to have to understand the demand side of things and probably plan when you charge, particularly commercial vehicles, at different depots. So we think that the communication between the connected and automated vehicles, that are also electric, and the transportation system, as well as the electric grid, we think there's going to be an ecosystem that actually crosses those areas so that we can be much more planful with the demand of electricity. And so I think in general, with Drew, the ability to communicate across platforms and avoid those proprietary niches that you can't see through is probably in the public interest.
Christian, anything?
This is not certainly my bailiwick, but from our side, we like to be quite agnostic. So open platforming, the ability to go across is ideal for us, principally from an economic perspective. The cost of trying to make things bespoke to a particular brand or a standard that has variability is just expensive. And when we can reduce expense and make ourselves a little bit more open, that's our preferred route.
Okay. Ginger?
Christian, this next question is for you, Christian. So do you think LSVs in general will be an outsized part of local electrification?
Good question. I wish that I could give you a little bit more detailed answer on that. I think I may even ask some of my colleagues to get their opinions on it. I actually stay away from kind of getting into some of these conversations because my understanding is a little bit on the shorter side. But my feeling is that yes, it would.
Anything to add?
I don't think so.
Next question, can you estimate a vehicle life for the batteries and vehicles themselves? And with the updates in technology, will they still be able to charge the older models?
I'll start and maybe Rich can add on to it, but in general, all electric vehicles are sort of just like your gas cars. You have warranties for all kinds of parts, and sometimes the warranties are on different years and miles, but in general, electric vehicle batteries are warranted for a certain amount of degradation over 100,000, 150,000 miles, those kinds of numbers. So every battery loses capacity or the ability to store electricity over time, over its life as it's used. But the automakers are giving you warranties to be sure that you don't have a battery that, you know, just dies one day. So kind of like the cell phone. Everyone has had a cell phone, and then 2 years later, you're like, man, this thing won't stay charged all day. Good thing is electric vehicle batteries are much, much bigger, much more protected from thermal environments and things than our cell phone batteries. So they will last a lot longer than the cell phone batteries. But I've seen studies that'll say, you know, the parts of the vehicle that will wear out first are the metal and the plastic parts, not the electric motors or the batteries. And I'll kind of jump on a question that's further down about recycling those. I think there's a lot of activity in that space with the Department of Energy and others. As these batteries hit the end of their useful life in a car, do they come out of the car and go into a second useful life sitting still somewhere, storing electricity at your home or on the grid? And then after they've gone through their second life there and the capacity is even further down, how do we recycle? How do we reuse the materials inside of them? I think, you know, nothing is more recyclable than a lead acid battery in our cars, but there is a supply chain and a process to do that. I think as more car batteries hit the end of their useful life, we'll understand the processes to recycle and replace those as well.
Gotcha. And that whole question, if y'all have anything to add, Christian or Rich, any comments around wireless charging and or also comments around battery waste recycling concerns?
I could spend an hour on that topic. So just maybe one comment about these large OEMs who are transitioning. I mean, they have a 100-year history of making highly reliable cars. Massive recalls are so expensive and damaging to them financially and reputationally that you will not find organizations who are more concerned about reliability of a product as they are. The losses can be immense. And so you'll find these people absolutely dedicated to understanding the life of these vehicles, what we can expect, and covering these with warranties. So just amplifying what Drew said in that space. And so we have the privilege of working very closely with many of these OEMs. And when you get to the vehicle validation and verification people, you meet some of the most serious people you're going to find in the company. And so I'm sure Christian could add something to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the lithium ion battery that's inside of an Ollie is the heart and soul of the vehicle. We are also aware of the life of a vehicle. And unlike traditional OEMs that are making vehicles for highway traffic, we look at the battery's life from a cycle time, how many times do we charge it, and its operating hours. So we're seeing quite a useful life. So our first Ollies were built in 2016 and they're still running with their original battery. So that should give you an idea of your lifespan right now, and we're not seeing any degradation whatsoever. We are seeing many players come into the sphere to figure out how they're going to handle the batteries once they have reached their useful life. Do they become capacitors at home? Do they get recycled? Right now, we are using some companies that are kind of partners with the original cell suppliers, but we're expecting more players to come in to be able to take those products that are coming out of vehicles and repurpose them.
And maybe taking that question a little different direction. Imagine a autonomous shuttle that is running on electricity that can essentially replace your current use of your 5% utilized vehicle. So there may be a shift in the ownership model as we move forward with automated vehicles where you basically can't afford to own your own car because you can get on a per mile basis a much more efficient delivery of people and goods using these automated shuttles. And if you look at the Lyfts and the Ubers and where they may be headed longer term, essentially you get past personal ownership. And if you get past personal ownership and you move from 5% utilization to say 75 or 80 or 90% utilization, you rack up 300,000 miles in a car in a couple of years, and its end of life is not a decade, it's a year. And so that type of shift may be coming to us in the coming decade.
And I had a question that was direct messaged. Will power grids be able to handle increased electricity demands from electric vehicles?
So we include electric vehicle adoption scenarios in all of our forecasting and planning, including our long range plans like the IRP. And so we had scenarios that went from basically no more electric cars to all electric cars. So we have definitely done the math on if every car tomorrow starts being electric, what does that mean for us? Kind of all normal scenarios, this is something easily managed by TVA. And we don't really have to build a whole lot of power plants in the near term or anything because the power system has lots of extra capacity if we can coordinate and plan when that charging happens, something Rich talked about earlier. So, not charging at the hottest parts of the day and charging at, nighttime and things like that. But as EV adoption increases, kind of the upper ends of those forecasts are growth that is similar to when everyone started adding air conditioning to their homes. So it's something that TVA has seen in the past. It's something that can be managed with proper planning, but it is something that we have to continue to put a focus on and to understand the new technologies coming out, especially when electrification happens in some of these vehicles that have never been electric before, like 18-wheelers and medium and heavy duty things. Understanding those duty cycles, understanding those charging needs are important.
And maybe something to add too, and this is maybe a controversial topic. And as battery prices come down, this looks more realistic. But you got to realize that you look at a heavy duty truck, and it could be a gigawatt hour of storage on that truck, and they're capable of delivering power back into the grid, and perhaps even stabilizing local areas that are having power issues or need some demand. So there is one scenario where this becomes the grid scale storage becomes the vehicle, and they can essentially coordinate and deliver power back into the grid. I mean, the price of the battery is pretty high. Do you want to do that routinely? Likely not, because you could degrade the battery's long-term life. But in particularly emergency situations, I believe that's something that will be on the table in the future.
Really agree with that. I think you saw what happened in Texas not too long ago. And, would you trade that type of impact and financial impact and impact to people for, reducing the life of some electric vehicles by discharging their battery? I think so in extreme situations like that. So I think as that technology matures, and you got to have a lot of things go right for that to happen. You got to have a car that can do it, with the batteries that can do it, with the charging infrastructure that can do it, with the communications and the planning that can do it, and the utility that can do it. So there's a lot of steps along that, but I think it's definitely something in the future.
Any other questions? Ginger?
I had one more. Will the supply of green energy continue to output demands for electric vehicles?
Repeat that question one more time.
Yeah, will the supply of green energy continue to output demands for electric vehicles? So it's kind of similar to the last one as well.
But if I heard it right, it was specifically green electricity?
Yes, green energy. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of piggybacking on the previous question about can we provide enough electricity, we kind of really see these two things balancing. Electrification of transportation versus the increase in renewable generation and energy efficiency, just becoming more efficient with the electricity that we use now. And so those really kind of offset each other. So, solar and things on people's homes or on businesses means less electricity for TVA to produce. Energy efficiency means less electricity for TVA to produce. Electrification of transportation means more electricity for TVA to produce. So these things really kind of interplay and balance as we go forward. And kind of that balance is what we're interested to see. We think there's definitely a correlation there. It just depends on sort of the adoption of both technologies.
All right. Any other questions before we close?
There is one question there I'm not sure we fully addressed. It was around the wireless charging, and wireless charging. We're pushing later this year. We should be pushing 200 kilowatts into a moving car up at the American Center for Mobility with our partners at VW. And at the end of the day, we're working toward vehicles that are going to be fast charging, particularly these very large heavy duty vehicles that are, they will be able to pull down a couple of megawatts to charge these things. Now, I don't know if you've all carried a cable that carries a megawatt before, but it's going to take everybody on the phone here to carry it. And that wireless charging is looking increasingly important as we move into the medium and heavy duty vehicle, and particularly in the commercial spaces and depots. We believe that this is going to be either dynamically or statically, and we think it's a combination of both, are going to be what we use to essentially continue to power the vehicles and really reduce the demand for the batteries on the vehicles. I mean, there's estimates that say that a Class 8 truck can hold 12 to 16,000 pounds worth of batteries on there, which is going to reduce their payload. If you could even pull a few battery packs out of there, it makes it much more commercially viable. And we'd like to be able to take things like hills and areas where it'll be an extreme power demand, such as crossing across our state, and be able to electrify areas there that deliver the charge necessary to have those vehicles do the hill climbs and extend their range with smaller battery packs. We think this is a big part of what the future might look like.
Anything to add there, guys? All right. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you three guys, Rich, Drew, Christian. Thank you for coming on here with us this morning. Thank you guys, especially for your insight and your contributions to this important industry in our community. We look forward to watching how the future of EVs impacts the region and impacts our nation for sure. And we just want to say we appreciate the contributions you're making to that industry here in our community. Again, thank you guys very much for joining us today. Great discussion. Please visit knoxvillechamber.com if you have any questions, and we'll follow up with you. I think, Drew, we probably will want to put that sustainability link in a follow-up to everybody so they can get to it easily. So again, thank you guys so much for joining us this morning, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.